Good day, everyone. Welcome to Research, Recovery, and Reskill webinar. I'm Susan Vernon Devlin, Manager of Communications and Marketing for UCF Rosen College of Hospitality Management. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. First, a bit of housekeeping. Attendees, we will not use the chat feature or the raise your hand feature for this webinar. We will only use the question and answer feature. Please place all questions in the comment area and we will respond to your questions at the end of the presentation. However, feel free to type in your questions as we move along throughout the presentation as you think of them. If your question is the same or similar to another question that is asked, we will only respond once. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, rest assured we'll reach out to you afterwards and respond. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Yu-Cheng Wong, Dean of Rosen College of Hospitality Management, to start the webinar and introduce our presenters. Dr. Wong?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Susan, for your introduction. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the series webinars we designed for our alumni, and we decided to extend that also to other stakeholders, including our students, faculty members, and industry stakeholders. I hope that you can enjoy the beautiful weather at the Sunshine State. When I look outside, we have a lot of sunshine in the state of Florida, Orlando, but I don't believe that will be reality today. So as I said, this seminar was really designed to help our alumni and industry professionals to get out of this pandemic stronger and smarter. We also want to really let our alumni and industry professionals to know that Rosen College is here to support, to really get out of this crisis. Today's format is a little bit different from previous formats. Previously, we did basically presentations. Today, we have a panel discussion led by our own assistant professor, Dr. Diego Bufquin, focused on a very, very interesting topic, which will be related to leadership, communications, and HR strategies in times of crisis. We have two great panelists, Mark Havard from Hyatt Regency, and Jason Rivera from Rosen Hotels and Resorts. These are great industry leaders and also great friends of Rosen College. And I believe that Diego will introduce more appropriately to the audience. So with that, Diego, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Wong. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Susan. So today we have two panelists, Mark Havard, the Director of HR at the Hyatt Regency Orlando, and Jonathan Rivera, Director of Safety Services at Rosen Hotels and Resorts. Thank you, Mark and Jonathan, for being with us today. Can you see me, by the way? Yeah?
I can.
Yeah, wonderful. Perfect. And I'm glad that you can hear me too. So today I'm going to ask questions to see how these two panelists handled the pandemic at their respective hotel property. Okay, so I'm going to start with Mark. I'm going to start with a question. So the Hyatt Regency Orlando, Mark, your hotel property, which is one of my favorite properties here in Orlando, and which is also one of the largest hotels in Central Florida, announced plans on March 18 that it would shut its doors the following day, on March 19, and I'm just quoting the Orlando Business Journal. So how and when did the hotel executive committee make that decision internally? And how did the HR department communicate the temporary closure of the hotel property to all of its employees?
Well, first off, thank you for inviting me to this opportunity. Definitely unprecedented situation and pandemic, learning a lot as we go along. But yes, indeed, we did. At the time, we had no idea what we were getting into, but we did make that decision to temporarily suspend our hotel operations. The two driving factors of that was safety, which continues to be a driving factor, safety of our employees, safety of our guests, our vendors, anybody that comes in the hotel. Certainly we started to see business canceling. We're primarily a group hotel, and the convention business and the group business began to cancel, somewhat slow, but then it moved into a much more rapid pace. And after we saw the business levels dip to the teens as far as occupancies, and certainly listening to the CDC from a safety standpoint, those two factors resulted in our decision to temporarily suspend the operations of our hotel. We have about 1,200 employees. That includes our on-call people. And it was certainly a challenge at the beginning to be in touch with all those employees. We, in the human resources team, one thing we knew that we had addresses for people, and the vast majority of those addresses are accurate, not all, but we made a decision and thought out a little bit. So we made a decision to draft a letter to all of our employees talking about our temporary suspension. We asked each of them to update their email addresses. We asked each of them to update their phone numbers, which they can do in a self-service application. And we told them that we would be using email. And we also set up a message line for our employees to call in. And so the initial communication was done via mail. And also in the departments, we attempted, and we had a quick time to do this, but we attempted to make a phone call to everybody who wasn't at work, just being consistent with our purpose of care. We've tried to make some verbal connections as often as possible. So that was really the beginning, and boy, did we have very little idea of what this was going to snowball to.
That's very interesting. And so what were employees' reactions or questions or concerns with regard to the announced hotel closure? Like, were they distressed? They didn't understand the situation? How did they react?
I think the initial reaction was shock. Again, we didn't know what we were getting into. And so the initial reaction was shock. When are we going to come back? How long is this going to be? I think people thought that it was going to be much shorter than what it's really turned out to be. What's going to happen with my employment? But definitely an initial reaction of shock, and how long is this going to last? Which, of course, at the time we projected that we were going to open up at a date in May, but as we know, that didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, you were projecting to open a little earlier, but then you had to postpone the hotel opening. And what about you, Jonathan? How did employees react to the announced hotel closure?
Hi, Diego. Thank you for the opportunity. I think that we were all seeing prior to this a very booming economy, a very vibrant atmosphere here in Orlando, Florida, both in the leisure and the convention business. The Orlando International Airport had reported record numbers in the recent years. So to go from that to this, was shocking. Rosen Hotels has operated for over 40 years, and never had we come across the circumstances that would lead us to close most of our hotels. So shocking, surprising to our team and to the staff. I think that eventually led to some relief, because as our staff began to see the gravity and the scope of this public health challenge, they understood that maybe being at home was safer for them. So the shocking reaction, I think, led, as I said, to somewhat of a relief to know that they were not going to be exposed to people, that they were going to be safer at home. So I think I think the reaction progressed and changed over time.
And I read an article that Mr. Harris Rosen actually kept on paying most, if not all, employees while they were furloughed. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, I think if you just do some reading about Mr. Rosen, you tend to, get a bit of his heart, and that's how he runs the organization. So our organization is known to take good care of associates, and Mr. Rosen, having established a very financially stable and healthy organization, debt-free hotels, was in a position to be able to, help associates through these times.
And just to give a quick overview of what happened with Rosen Hotels and Resorts. So Rosen Hotels and Resorts own and operate 8 properties located in Orlando, and only 1 remained open during the pandemic, correct?
Correct. The Rosen Center has not closed. We housed and continue to house first responders, National Guard, nurses. Mr. Rosen tends to want to be a place that people can count on. Year after year, when hurricanes come, he tends to open the properties, provide hurricane refugee rates to people like me, risk management, safety. I don't want a building full of people in the middle of a hurricane, but his heart it is to help people, for people to count on us. So I think that, that helped in the decision to leave the Rosen Center open and do what we could to help.
Perfect. So now I'm going to ask you both another question. So who were the employees that had to continue working during the hotel closures, and what tasks or activities did they have to perform? Those employees that kept on working during the pandemic.
Go ahead, Jonathan, first.
Thanks, Mark. So when this started, at least, to get our attention in March, we established a internal task force, and that task force, developed response procedures and different stages of response that transitioned to a sort of business continuity mindset. And we are now working on reopening processes. So that team has remained at work, quite busy. Obviously, the team at the Rosen Center has stayed at work, but also at the properties that have closed down. Just because a building is closed down doesn't mean that we just shut the doors and go home. The buildings have to be maintained. If you turn off the air conditioning in a hotel room, you're going to get mold. The humidity in Florida is horrific. So the buildings are still flowing. We have to keep water flowing in the pipes. We don't want Legionella to be an issue after we open. So we have staff following protocols and processes to ensure that when we open, We open very safe hotels and restaurants and conference centers for our guests. So each of those hotels have had staff. We've also kept different special projects going. I think in part, just Mr. Rosen's heart to try to keep people employed. We took the opportunity to do a bunch of stuff we just didn't have the chance to do before because we were so busy. So, projects that were very intrusive in public areas, we were able to do different things around the hotels. Mr. Rosen even partnered with the Orange County school district and had some of our staff go and clean schools. Again, just ways to keep people working. So I'll say that we had a good amount of people that have remained working in different areas, just doing different things. Also, even in the central offices, support areas, finance, our human resources office has been absolutely central to what we have been doing in communication with our teams. So we've had a good group that has been hard at work through this time.
What about you, Mark? Who were the employees that remained working at the Hyatt Regency Orlando?
Yeah, very similar to what Jonathan said. Most of the employees were here to ensure the safety and the maintenance of the building didn't get compromised. Very important for us as well to keep the water moving through the different buildings in the hotels, keep the humidity out of the hotels. So we had on property, we had staff of engineers on each shift in the hotel. Interestingly enough, we did have a water pipe break. So it's, again, you don't have any revenue coming in, and so you're conscious of your expenses, but you also need to be responsible to your building as well. And so because we had folks here, we were able to mitigate any much of the problem that would happen with a water pipe break. So we had engineering, we had security, we had a couple of housekeeping employees, and they were assisting with the water moving through the rooms, flushing toilets, turning on faucets, and making sure that all 1,600 rooms had that on a weekly basis, that we were moving water through the hotel. We also kept a front office staff to answer phones, to be here for our guests that might be calling. And then we had some, we want to continue with the selling process, right? So our sales managers were still working remotely, but still working, maintaining relationships. Believe it or not, we have been able to book some business. And then a couple of event people to turn that business over to. And then a couple of people on our human resources team to work through all of our workforce action planning, which we're going to get to in a little bit, and also to be communicating with our employees. So you have 1,200 people who are wondering what's going on with their job, when is the hotel reopening, what's happening to me, my benefits. The week we closed, we were able to provide over $100,000 worth of food and perishables that we were not going to be using. So we brought we had a food giveaway day, if you will, for our folks that was very well attended. I would say, we probably had 600 people here for a food giveaway, and it was, really a nice extension of care, but it really also kind of set the tone for us to be able to communicate with the employees during our temporary closure.
Perfect. So Mark, let me continue with you. as you said earlier, the initial expectation for the hotel to reopen was on May 3rd, 2020, but the Hyatt Regency Orlando only reopened on June 10th. And so can you tell us a little bit how your department, the HR department, communicated these opening date changes?
Mm-hmm.
And what were employees' also reactions or concerns, once again, when they heard about these changes?
Yeah, I think at this point in time, people were realizing that this was more than we had anticipated. And so that message that we weren't able to open in early May, I don't think came as any sort of a surprise. At this point, we were ramped up quite well with emails. Again, we have about 1,200 employees, and I'm proud to say that we were able to communicate via email with about everybody except about 40 people. So we had great communication via email, and we also had a phone. So human resources is working remotely at this time as well. There was the stay at home in Florida, so we're working remotely. We had a phone line set up, and employees could call in, leave messages, request benefit time. We could communicate. We called them back. We communicated back via email, via phone. We paid for our employees' medical insurance, both the employer and employee portion. We paid for the medical insurances for the months of April, May, and this month that we're in right now, June. And we did that throughout the United States. There was definitely some positive messages that we could share with our people that were consistent with our purpose of caring for people. And care means something different when you're in a pandemic than it does when you're operating at 90% occupancy and things are going great. So we had really some good news to share for people, even though we were not going to resume the operation. And again, that was mostly expected. There wasn't a great deal of shock at that point.
And last little question to you, Mark, before I go over to Jonathan. Since the hotel reopening, how many employees were hired back? So you had 1,200 initially before the pandemic, and now how many employees do you have working for you?
So sadly, we had to make some really, really difficult decisions. And I've worked for Hyatt for over 30 years. And this has been the most challenging period of my career with Hyatt and, our company. I know that people saw that our corporate office had quite a few positions that were eliminated. And we too did at our hotel. We are open. We're running during the week. We're running single-digit occupancies, and on the weekend we're running low double-digit occupancies. So we did eliminate positions. Very, very difficult week when we did that. We provided severance, we provided outplacement services, but it still was challenging, as you can well imagine. We have hope that we can bring back people. So we do have people that will be moving to layoff. They're on furlough right now. They're moving to layoff on June 30th. We are probably going to have from July, at least through the month of July, we'll have around 200 employees that'll be working.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a very challenging time, and probably until they find the vaccine, things are gonna be challenging for a little while, I believe, right?
Yeah. in our company, we're finding a little bit more, a little bit more impact on our group and convention hotels, which makes sense. Our resort properties, our properties that are along water, they're having better business success than our group hotels. I think Jonathan will tell you, we love being right here next to the convention center. It is position A for Orlando to be located right here next to the convention center on I Drive. But right now that's not helping us.
Right, yeah. So Jonathan, let me ask you a couple of questions as well regarding Rosen Hotels and Resorts. So Harris Rosen, who recently moderated a roundtable at the Rosen Shingle Creek along with the Vice President of the U.S. and Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis, said that we want everybody back to work as quickly as possible. How do we do that? We make an announcement that our goal is to get everyone back to work quickly. And then he continued by saying that two provisions. When you open your restaurant, your attraction, your hotel, screen every customer, client, and guest that comes into your facility. And then every single day, screen every one of your employees to make sure that they're healthy. So, and then he kept on saying, is that simple? Yeah. You have a clean environment and the folks that are coming into your facility have been screened. So having said that, Jonathan, did Rosen Hotels and Resorts start implementing such screening procedures with all hotel guests, employees, and even suppliers? And also, how have these stakeholders reacted to the communication of such intense screening procedures?
So yes, simple as a concept, we've learned difficult in application. Something as simple as finding medical grade thermometers, incredibly difficult at the quantity that we needed. So just to even get our hands on the equipment, we went through numerous different thermometers, which we found not to be accurate. We're fortunate to have medical professionals within our organization as part of Rosen Care and the Rosen Medical Center. So we would, defer to them on this equipment. But my point is that even to get the equipment was difficult enough. So we have implemented the screening. It actually was in place the day that event took place at the Rosen Shingle Creek. We have evolved some of the processes, but we are screening for temperature all guests, all associates, and all vendors. As it relates to your question of how have stakeholders reacted, I think that the vast majority understand. The vast majority welcome the practice. It's something that makes them feel that something important is being done as part of the overall program that we have. I found that particularly for associates, it was very big for associates to know that although there's no silver bullet, although this is a layered approach, we had this big layer of temperature screening. It was something comforting to them. It was big for our staff to be able to do that. So we've had a good reaction to that process.
Wonderful. And so besides those screening procedures, what other safety procedures has Rosen Hotels and Resorts adopted?
So we've had the ability, being that the Rosen Center has remained open, and the Rosen in Point Orlando, which is our largest leisure property, opens today. We've had the opportunity to test a lot of our procedures, put actually into practice a lot of our plans. What you develop in theory as part of a task force, go and actually test it and see how it works. So we've been able to develop these layers, and it's been good to see that the industry as a whole has moved to a very similar response, and that gives you comfort to know that, hey, what you're thinking is right. So, you know, we have the temperature, but we also have the education of the guest and of the associates and of the vendors. So before anybody is to come to our hotel or to our restaurant, they receive a communication tool that we call a Know Before You Go document that has a number of different pieces of information on our processes. We don't want anyone surprised when they get to our hotel. We want them to know what the procedures are, what the processes are, and what they should expect, both as to what we're doing and what we expect them to do as part of a partnership, because this has to be a partnership if this is going to work. So we speak about social distancing. We speak about, you know, decals and clings on the floor, plexiglass, acrylic, or glass barriers at service locations. We speak about cleanliness, disinfectation with fast-acting disinfectants, spraying with a product we have used at our medical facility for a number of years. Is an electrostatic product that disinfects, and we found it very useful in guest rooms and other areas. We speak about what will happen if you have a high temperature. We have processes in place to help the guest if they have high temperatures. Given our medical expertise with Rosen Care and Rosen Medical Center, we've been able to establish processes with Orlando Health and other private organizations to assist the guests that may need COVID testing, further assessment. We've established private testing for our associates. So since early March, we've lined up with a lab, and our medical facility takes the specimen and our lab conducts the testing. So our staff not need to go and wait hours for testing. We take them to our facility, get a quickly result within 24 hours to know if we need to contact trace further. So there's different layers to this approach. But I think what we have found, Diego, at the end of it all, to be critical is that both associates and guests need to understand that this is a partnership. A hotel, a conference center, a restaurant cannot, and it's impossible to babysit every aspect of this mitigation. We have to partner. We have to work together to reduce the risk to a tolerable level. If we were to wait for a vaccine to open, we would not be open. A lot of companies will go out of business. So what we've got to do is try to mitigate the risk, bring it down to a tolerable level, just as we do when we get in our car and we drive somewhere. There's a risk, but we tolerate it. We feel comfortable with that level of risk. And it's just decisions that we have to make. And if the guest partners with us, we feel strongly that we can do a very good job at mitigating the risk.
Perfect. I can see already that we have one question in the Q&A here. So I will ask all attendees while we're talking to type your questions, because we're going to go over them in a few minutes. Once our conversation here is over, we'll take your questions. Okay. So perfect. So and by the way, I'm going to ask a question to both of you. Customers, because you said that customers also have to partner with your hotel properties, right? And so are they wearing are most of your customers, are they wearing masks? Is that something that they are doing in your lobby area, in your restaurants, and so forth, or not really?
Since Saturday at 12:01 a.m., the percentage of people wearing masks has gone up drastically. We are working again from a partnership angle and standpoint to work with folks in reference to masking. You know, information has evolved. Social distancing was huge. Masking has gone up there to be as important as social distancing, while there was a time that the CDC said that healthy people did not need to wear a mask. So things have evolved. So yes, I think that we've seen a significant increase on mask use in our hotels on the guest side. On the associate side, our stance had been that any associate that could not maintain a social distance throughout their shift or at any point in their shift could not, they would have to wear a mask. So most of our staff was already wearing masks, but guests, since the mayor's order came out, have been wearing masks on the most part.
Perfect. And what about you, Mark?
Similarly, we're requiring that our guests are wearing masks since the executive order on Saturday. So in areas, public areas of the hotel, all of our guests are asked to wear masks. We ask them to wear masks if they're not wearing masks. We provide masks to our guests as well. Areas where they might not have to, well, they wouldn't have to wear a mask would be in the pool, obviously swimming, and in food areas where they're eating and drinking. But all other public areas, we're asking our guests to wear their masks. And for our employees, that they too wear a mask. Every employee, you'd asked Jonathan earlier about some safety procedures and how do the employees react. You know, every employee that comes in, every vendor that comes in, they are all temperature checked. They're all asked a series of self-wellness questions. And they're all wearing masks when they come into the building. You know, similarly to other places that you've seen around, we have social distancing markers throughout the front of the house and the back of the house. We've adjusted our food delivery systems and presentations, and you know, our room cleanliness processes, our check-in processes. And I would tell you that the vast majority of the people appreciate it. And what we're finding is that the guests appreciate the safety steps and initiatives and the hygiene that we're taking, and the employees do too. And actually, the stronger the employees feel about their workplace being safe and having good hygiene, that carries over to the guest, and the guests see that. And so if your employees are feeling good about their workplace, then you know it's attractive to the guest and helpful to our business. And so we'll continue with that. Every day we have a QR code colleague pulse survey. And every day we ask our employees to take the survey. It's 5 questions asking about their comfort level with safety. Do they have all the personal protective equipment that they need? Are we holding people accountable? So there's 5 questions all related to safety, and we monitor that every single day. And if we need further follow-up, we're going to stand-up meetings and shift meetings so that we can become better with time.
Wonderful. So, you know, now we're going to go over the attendees' questions, okay? They have several very interesting questions here. So let me first go over this question from Mackie Mac. Well, she's asking, is it possible to share the know before you go document, Jonathan?
So yeah, so if you go to rosenhotels.com, You're going to find a banner on the top of the webpage. There's a couple of banners with information. One of those banners leads you to a page where we have the Know Before You Go, and you have videos and other types of communication tools that we've developed, showing some of our mitigation processes and other things. To find the Know Before You Go document that is specific to a particular hotel of ours, just go to that hotel's website and it should be there. Something to note is that this is a very fluid situation. So our documents are ever changing, it feels like. So we're always adjusting, my suggestion is, if you want to get a sense as to how an organization evolves in communication, just visit their website, once a week through a pandemic. You'll get a good sense as to how communication evolves.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So now we have a question from Fevzi, our dear professor here at the Rosen College. He's asking, my question is, how can we better help our active and furloughed employees and managers build resilience during these challenging times? How can you better help your active and furloughed employees and managers to build resilience?
To me, that question is all about communication frequently, and whether that's in person, whether that's via email. We need to be the support for our employees, and we need to exhibit care on a very frequent level. During the time when our hotel was closed, I personally talked to a lot of our employees, and it was very comforting to hear our employees' appreciation for how much we were communicating with them, whether that was, help applying for unemployment, which was really and still is a difficult situation, whether it was answering some benefit questions, or whether it was just talking to the employee a little bit about what's happening in our society in the pandemic. It was most appreciated. And I heard on a number of occasions, my spouse's employer my spouse doesn't know anything about what's happening at their work. And so it really made you feel good to know that your communication was meaningful and helpful and valued by our employees. And so to me, that's one way. And the other way is by obtaining their feedback, whether that's in person or, as I mentioned, our colleague pulse survey. So valuable that you're getting input from your folks in order to continue to become better. As Jonathan said, this is very fluid and we are learning. We're moving into a phase where, we might see some guests that have tested positive or have fevers, or some employees. So it's a little bit different phase that maybe we haven't seen. And how are we handling those situations? Are our employees comfortable with it? So the feedback is really important.
So talking about what you just said, Mark, there's a question from Susan, who she's asking, how are you dealing with the fear factor of employees who are reluctant to return to work, fearing that they may contract the virus?
So I think first off, the importance is the communication that Jonathan did so well with what safety steps and measures are you taking in your building. And so really making sure that our employees understand what we are doing and to minimize that risk. And if they're still concerned about that, we're not making them come back to work. We have other employees who are not working. And so, for the time being and for probably the remainder of the year, if there's an employee who's not comfortable coming back to work, that's fine. We would have somebody to follow. We'd still be able to operate our business and respect the fact that the person is not feeling comfortable about their workplace. And that's not a time to make them come to work or lose your job.
Perfect. So we have still 14 minutes left. We have a few more questions yet to answer. So let's try to answer these questions, let's say, as objectively as possible. So Heather, if a guest is screened and has a high temperature, what is the policy to deal with that in order to keep everyone safe and healthy while also trying to maintain good relations? So I think, Jonathan, you said that you had a procedure if a guest had a temperature. What was that procedure?
Right. So, 80% of symptomatic COVID patients exhibit a fever. So, although it's not a silver bullet, it is a good point to use as you're trying to keep, at least the COVID cases that you can measure out of your building. So we understood that may be an issue with some guests. We understood that may be an issue with some groups. But when we made the decision, prepared to know that would occur. But we also worked on a process whereby the guests wouldn't feel like we're just shutting the door on them and saying, don't come in, but we're providing them with a process. So if you are to come in and you test with a temperature of 100.4 or higher, you would be asked you'll be given the opportunity to wait in a particular air-conditioned area. And within the next 30 minutes, we would check your temperature again, understanding that Florida is quite hot. And if you were outside for a while, that may affect your skin temperature. So if the person does not pass that second screening, then again, going back to the whole thing, we're not shutting the door, go away. We are helping them with the process. Now, from a liability standpoint, what we do not want to do is tell a person, here, go over there, get a COVID test, and if you're negative, come back. Why? Well, let's say that their appendix just bursted, and that's the cause of their fever, and they need emergency surgery. We, a hotel, is in no place to direct somebody exactly what to do because of a fever. So instead, what we want to do is help them with a process, but not go to that degree, right? And expose ourselves to liability. So what we do is we provide some options. We say the nearest hospital is here. If you want to see an urgent care is there. If you want to seek some fast return time COVID testing, we've made arrangements with that facility. You can go there. We'll pay for the transportation if necessary. But we leave it up to the guest to make the decision. We also made arrangements with a number of hotels in the area that would be willing to accept the guest and house them if the guest opted to be tested and wait roughly 24 hours for the test to return. So we would say, here's some options for medical care if you so choose to do that. Here's some options for alternate accommodations if you so choose to do that. And we provide that to the guest. And the communication and how that is handled obviously is key. But that's sort of what the process that we have in place now.
And have you had cases where customers were unhappy with this process that you just described?
I think if anybody looks at the news, you'll find always that there's folks out there that don't like masks, that don't like this, don't like that. I think we have to be realistic and know that there's a chance we may come across an individual like that. And again, how we handle it and how we communicate is key. Of the guests that we've had to assist, and by the way, it's very minimal. it's a very minute number of the guests that are coming in.
Yeah.
I think that our Advent Health, in the communications we've had with them, also experienced a very minimal number of febrile or people with fever. We've had very minimal, but I believe I recall one person, just one that I recall, that had difficulty with us letting them know that their temperature was elevated. And we worked through that process. You know, we're in the hospitality industry, so we're used to working through, you know, processes, but it was just one.
Perfect. And so you talked earlier about the fact that you have many employees that are still furloughed, right? So there's a question here from Julio Melendez. He's asking, how are you communicating the plans to those furloughed employees for the future of those employees, especially since some unemployment benefits are ending in July or soon? So yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. As Mark laid out, you know, the use of email, the use of phone calls has been crucial. I mean, it has been the main pathways of communication for us in communicating with our associates, any employment moves, any decisions that are being made. Mr. Rosen has filmed some videos, and those are sent to the associates. Prior to the pandemic, some of our internal publications were being sent to associates' emails already. We have something called The Buzz, which is a weekly type of newsletter via email. So we try to keep, you know, every week with normal messaging about the virus, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about transmission, about what we're doing. But when it comes to, you know, special communication that needs to happen, particularly about employment status and things like that, it tends to be phone and email. And we try, in addition to a member of the HR team, we have the general manager of that hotel also give a call to that associate and communicate with them, because obviously they know each other, there's a relationship there, and we want the associate to feel free to actually have a conversation, just actually be able to speak as to the news that they're getting.
Yeah, we made a point, any employment actions were not done via email. They were done verbally over the phone. Again, this is new to us because we have the COVID virus. Normally, this would be an in-person situation that you would have in a conversation, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But we wanted to make it as personal as we could. So every employment action is started with a phone call. If we are unable to reach the associate after the second phone call, we do then resort to the email that we have for that employee. So we really wanted to keep a personal level of communication for employment actions.
And we have time for just one last question from Julie Guys. She's asking, when helpful and valuable communication is not coming from leadership, what would you suggest to employees if it's not, if valuable or helpful communication is not coming from leadership? Like if basically employees are left on their own and leadership is not properly communicating, what would you suggest to those employees?
So I think that a lot of pre-pandemic dynamics come into play. If your organization had a good open door policy, let's say, or had good means of communication, or people feel comfortable in speaking up, then I think any pandemic situation such as this, then those associates would use those channels that they're comfortable with, that they've used before. So I think that, you know, if an associate of ours needs information we would hope that they would contact. And in our company, it does not need to be your immediate manager or supervisor. We have an open door policy. You know, from a security and safety standpoint, I do not like the fact that Mr. Rosen will open the door to anybody that knocks on his door. But he does. He says, I will not turn an associate away that wants to come to speak to me. So our associates have the ability to speak or call anybody that they feel comfortable with in calling to get information.
Yeah, I would agree. That's part of a culture of a workplace. Fortunately for Rosen hotels and for our hotel, that's not a culture that exists for our employees. They don't experience that. I could understand maybe some employers that are struggling financially. We're fortunate that, you know, I have a couple of people working in human resources, and that's, I think, a commitment that, you know, I'm proud that Hyatt has allowed us to have with very limited revenue coming in. We still have a small team of people here for our valued colleagues. And so, you know, neither Jonathan or our employees are going to experience a situation where they're not hearing from leadership, or if they have questions that you know, they're not going to find somebody to answer that. They will find somebody with their company and with our company, and it will be readily available for them.
So in other words, if you're left on your own by your employer, just switch jobs and go work for excellent companies like Hyatt and Rosen Hotels and Resorts, right?
In another word, yes.
In other words. All right, I think we're done. Susan, thank you very much for Mark and Jonathan today. I really appreciate your participation. And Susan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Mark, for those insightful discussions that we've had today. I just want to say thank you all for joining us. We have another webinar coming up in just 2 weeks on July the 10th. You can go to the Research, Recovery, and Reskill webinar page and register for it there. We will be looking at technology and leadership in that webinar. And so we thank you all for joining us today. Also on your screen, you will see some assets that you can use to possibly enhance your education. We have degree programs for our alumni who are seeking master's degree programs, and also some graduate certificates. So thank you all for joining us today, and have a great weekend.